Hello, and welcome to YouTube video number 44A in this two-part series exposing the Jesuit Vatican shadow empire that sank RMS Titanic in 1912, enabling Rome to take control of the money supply of the American empire 1 year later in 1913, the greatest wealth-producing nation on the face of the earth. Here's why that was possible. The Bible declares in 1 John chapter 5 and verse 19, "And we know that we are of God, and the whole world lies in wickedness." This means the whole world system is corrupt to the core. Why? Because corrupt men control it. The Jesuit military order of Rome control the world system from top down. The whole system is rotten. And that is why we see things going to hell, and rapidly. Think about the wickedness behind the evil conspiracy of the Jesuits to sink that grand boat Titanic using their Masonic puppets with so much loss of life. A terrible disaster. Here's what the Bible says in 2 Corinthians chapter 11, verses 13 to 15 about the Jesuits. "For such are false apostles, deceitful workers, transforming themselves into the apostles of Christ. And no marvel, for Satan himself is transformed into an angel of light. Therefore, it is no great thing if his ministers also be transformed as the ministers of righteousness, whose end shall be according to their works. And the works of the Jesuits are evil from beginning to finish." The Jesuits appear spiritually pious, but inside are full of dead men's bones, according to Jesus Christ in Matthew chapter 23 and verse 27. Christ was addressing the Luciferians of his day, the scribes and Pharisees of the Jews, who are the ancestors of the Jesuit military order today. They are the merchants of death. If the RMS Titanic was sunk deliberately with pre-intent, as I allege it was, then we need to know why. Cui bono? Or who benefited from this terrible act? As usual, we need to follow the money trail, and it leads to the Vatican bankers. The Jesuit military order of Rome needed to take control of the world's money supply in order to obtain absolute power over the earth. But how could they achieve this goal? The Jesuit plan was to institute an all-powerful central bank in the USA that would give the Jesuits total economic control and total immunity from government interference or prosecution over the issue of essentially worthless fiat currency, the US dollar, which would then become the world benchmark currency, controlling all other currencies. The Titanic death ship was the instrument by which dissenting parties to a central US bank were strategically removed, enabling passage of the Federal Reserve System bill through Congress into law virtually unhindered. I believe these are the 5 main reasons for the sinking of the Titanic. Number 1. The most important is the assassination by drowning of John Jacob Astor, Isador Straus, and Benjamin Guggenheim, 3 of the richest men in the USA who opposed a central US bank, now called the Federal Reserve Bank, or the Federal Reserve System. Number 2, the control of the fortunes of these 3 deceased men and others through money trusts, as the combined wealth of the passengers on Titanic is estimated to be, at that time, $500 million. I have no idea what that figure would equate to in today's dollar value, but maybe it's times 10. So there was an incredible fortune sailing on this boat, and the Jesuits saw a way of getting their hands on it. Number 3, the fraudulent insurance payout of $5 million on the previously damaged Olympic, disguised as the Titanic. And I'll talk about this a little bit later. There's a note here that, and I'm going to quote Andrew Aldridge of auctioneers Henry Aldridge and Son, who said, and I quote, "While the Titanic owners were swiftly recompensed, the families of victims who sued for negligence had to wait 4 years for compensation, and even that totaled only $663,000. $663,000. And I do believe that the total claims made on insurance companies amounted to $16 million. Again, out of these claims, only $663,000 were ever paid out to the families of the victims. So this is how insurance companies scam everyone involved. The Titanic parent company, the Oceanic Steam Navigation Company, received the full insurance payout within 30 days of the disaster in the Atlantic Ocean that saw 1,514 lives lost. So you can see here that the victims are always shoved aside in favor of corporate interests. Number 4, out of 2,214 passengers, 1,514 first, second, and third class passengers will be murdered, many of them poor Protestant and Catholic victims locked below deck in steerage as revenge against Protestant Belfast families and their resistance to Jesuit-based British Home Rule. There is a direct link to this, as the Jesuits have been trying to impose Home Rule on the Irish people. Number 5, the creation and glorification of the Titanic myth, which in itself is a very profitable industry and continues to keep the truth concealed about the Jesuits' involvement in the deliberate sinking of the Death Ship. There have been 16 movies or TV series featuring Titanic, including James Cameron's 1997 farcical romance and disaster epic featuring Rose and Jack, the central characters, which continues to perpetuate the iceberg accident myth and by itself grossed more than $2 billion. I still believe today that it is the highest grossing movie ever. Not a bad return on a $200 million investment. There were also 112 songs copyrighted in the USA in 1912 alone, commemorating the Titanic sinking. 112 songs. This is a huge industry, continues today to make money for the Jesuits' Hollywood propaganda ministry. What do statistics tell us about the Titanic phenomenon 107 years on? People continue to be hypnotized by this tragic story, and the Jesuits continue to profit from it handsomely. Every movie production is an absolute mockery of the nameless victims murdered to lay the foundations for the creation of the Jesuit fascist world beast system, now enslaving humanity. The Jesuits love to covertly and overtly eulogize this singular deception and triumph over mankind in taking control of world finance. They shove it in our faces wherever they can and gloat over how they took control of the world financial system. In his extensive expose of the Jesuit military order titled Vatican Assassins, Eric Phelps describes what occurred before and during the fatal voyage of the Titanic. I am using this text and facts contained in it, which I believe to be, for the most part, true, in order to establish that the official narrative of the accidental Titanic sinking is blatantly false. Now, I do not agree with everything that Eric J. Phelps has to say, and everything that he has written must be read carefully and must be cross-checked, as I have found mistakes, or I have found a resort to hyperbole here and there. So I'm using his material because I do believe the bones of it are correct, but there are other details which are misleading, I do believe. Here's a quick reminder of who the Jesuit Military Order of Rome is. G.B. Niccolini of Rome, a Protestant Italian patriot exiled to England, in his book History of the Jesuits, states in 1854, and I quote, "By the command of God, it is lawful to murder the innocent, to rob, and to commit all lewdness, because he, the Pope, is Lord of life and death and all things, and thus to fulfill his mandate is our duty," unquote. This is this is a quote by an ex-Jesuit. And again, I quote, "There is no record in history of an association whose organization has stood for 300 years at that time, unchanged and unaltered by all the assaults of men and time, and which has exercised such an immense influence over the destinies of mankind. The ends justify the means," is his favorite maxim. And as his only end, as we have shown, is the order. At its bidding, the Jesuit is ready to commit any crime whatsoever, unquote. So here they state very clearly that they will do anything to achieve their ends. Murder, war, genocide, revolution, it doesn't matter. Assassination. They will kill and murder anybody who stands in the road of their creating their one world system. In his book titled Footprints of the Jesuits, author Richard Wigginton Thompson describes the attitude of the Jesuit as to his vocation. And I quote, "I should regard myself," this is how the Jesuits think about themselves, "I should regard myself as a dead body, without will or intelligence." Take note of that. That's a zombie state. That's an automaton who is unthinking, who just follows orders. Without will or intelligence, as a little crucifix which is turned about unresistingly at the will of him who holds it. As a staff in the hands of an old man who uses it as he requires it and as it suits him best. And you're talking here about being a crucifix in the hands of the Jesuit Superior General, their ghostly father, the Black Pope. To do whatever he commands them to do, they will do it, unhesitatingly, even to sacrifice their own lives. And again, I quote, "When the general shall require the perpetration of any crime or the performance of any act howsoever perfidious or shameless, in all or any of these cases, the Jesuit shall execute his commands without fear of offense," unquote. This is the wicked and evil mind of the Jesuits. They will do anything. And so they did. They sank the Titanic. Remember the evil Council of Trent proclamation to destroy the Protestant Reformation and the Jesuit Fourth Bloody Oath of Induction binding candidates to the perpetration of any atrocity against humanity without question, as so commanded by the Jesuit Superior General, their ghostly father. It is with this satanically malevolent mind that the Titanic plan was hatched and executed in cold blood, resulting in the violent deaths of 1,514 people, changing the course of history forever as the Jesuits took control of the American money supply. Then they secretly placed central banks in every country through coercion and deceit, and took control of world finance in the course of history, right up to this very hour. It's all controlled by Rome. And if you don't think so, I'm sorry, but you are deceived. Here is a description of the world scene in 1909 as the Titanic was being built in Belfast, Ireland, a Protestant bastion hated by the Jesuit order for rejecting Jesuitical British home rule, and a target to be destroyed by their IRA revolution along with the Protestant British Empire worldwide. The destruction of the Protestant German Empire had also been set in motion as payback for the expulsion of the Jesuits from German territories in 1872 under the Jesuitengesetz, or Jesuits' law. The overthrow of the Orthodox Russian Empire had already begun, the Jesuits having provoked a war in 1905 using Emperor Meiji of Japan, another puppet of the Vatican. The 1917 Bolshevik Revolution will be wrongly blamed on the Jews, setting up the future Nazi pogrom against the Jews in the 1930s under Hitler's Roman Catholic Social Democrat regime, directed by Cardinal Pacelli, under the control of Vladimir Ledachalski, undisputably the most wicked Jesuit superior general ever to take office. And I've done another video about Vladimir Ledachalski because this man is very important to know about. So I urge you to go and watch that video if you get a chance. The destruction of Imperial Japan was also in the making. This is all happening around 1909. Payback for the expulsion of the Jesuits for 215 years between 1639 and 1854 under orders of the emperor's shoguns. They threw the Jesuits out and banned them. England's General Allenby will take Jerusalem from the Muslim Turks in 1917, the land of Palestine being necessary to create a future Zionist homeland for the Jews in 1948. Phelps states, and I for the most part tend to agree with him, that, and he quotes, "To finance this grand design, the Jesuits must put their privately owned Federal Reserve Bank in place before the First World War begins. That bank must be established in the greatest wealth-producing nation on earth, composed of mostly white Anglo-Saxon Protestants and Baptists. Remembering that the order has been expelled from Europe, having taken refuge in the Protestant, American, and British empires, its Masonic tools are in place and ready to obediently execute the plan." Unquote. And I do believe that for the most part this is correct. Remember that the Jesuit order took full control of all Freemasonry in 1776 under Adam Weishaupt's Illuminati, as well as all orders of papal knights through which they control world finance and banking. Against this background of Jesuit grand intrigue against the nations of the earth, the Titanic and its sister ship the Olympic became the center of a master plan, a stroke of genius beyond the comprehension of most minds. The Jesuit military order will kill 5 birds and maybe more with 1 stone by secretly swapping the nameplates of the boats and refurbishing the interior of the Olympic as if it was Titanic prior to sailing to its doom. Pictures verify this claim. Few people understand, and Phelps states it eloquently, and I quote, that the captain of the ship is Brother Edward J. Smith, S.J., or Jesuit, the world's greatest pilot and master of the North Atlantic waters, seasoned with 26 years on the high seas. Captain Smith is indeed one of the Black Pope's unseen and unknown temporal coadjutors. This means he was not a priest, but a Jesuit of the short robe, as the French would call him, serving the order in his profession. He, without will or intelligence, will commit this crime, this shameless and heartless atrocity, at the will of his master, who holds him as a little crucifix, and who uses him as it suits him best. Edward Smith has been required for martyrdom." Unquote. Phelps goes on to say that departing and I quote, "Departing southern England from the port of Southampton at 12 noon on April 10th, 1912, the captain's master had boarded. This man was the most powerful Jesuit in Ireland and answered directly to the Jesuit Superior General, Francis Xavier Wentz. The captain's master was the provincial superior of the Irish province, which includes Australia, of the Society of Jesus, Francis M. Brown. The presence of Ireland's most powerful man on board the ship was made publicly known in the video, Secrets of the Titanic, in its acknowledgments, released in 1986. The Jesuit Father Provincial, of which there are only 10 for the American Empire, spent a day on the death ship taking pictures of the passengers, knowing full well their fate." Unquote. Phelps writes, and I quote again, "For here is Jesuit treachery at its finest. Provincial Brown boards Titanic, photographs the victims, most assuredly briefs Captain Smith concerning his oath as a Jesuit, and the following morning bids him farewell. He takes a snapshot of the somber captain peering down from the bridge, along with 2 crew members, probably involved in the plot, as the lucky Provincial disembarks on the 11th of April, while the cheerful greetings of boarding Irishmen fall upon his ear, but never reach his heart." Unquote. Now, there's a little bit of poetic license in this writing, but I do believe there's a lot of truth to this. But listen, people, I could find no mention of Francis M. Brown holding the position of Irish Jesuit Provincial Superior, so I'm not sure if it's true. It may take extensive digging to find that and to verify that fact. And Phelps may be just stretching facts here, resorting to hyperbole. I do know, however, that Brown was well connected to Roman Catholic hierarchy. His uncle was a Roman Catholic Bishop of Cloyne in Ireland. His brother, William Brown, was a Jesuit. And in 1909, just 3 years before the Titanic sank, the 3 of them went to Rome together and had a private audience with Pope Pius X. Francis Brown was even permitted to take pictures of the Pope. That there is a big red flag. Huge red flag. So people who look at this and don't see what's going on here do not understand how the Roman Catholic hierarchy of control actually works. They were reporting to Rome. What was the real purpose of this visit? No one just visits the Pope. Visitors are summoned to appear. You are summoned by the Pope to appear. That's how it works. Remember, the Pope is a king of a country called Vatican State, subject to no worldly authority, yet the whole world is subject to his authority through the United Nations. Oh, yes, it is. Francis M. Brown was definitely rallying his Masonic troops on Titanic under a higher authority, but possibly not as an Irish provincial superior. I believe the purpose of the visit to Rome was to visit the Jesuit Superior General at the Gesu, at the headquarters of the Jesuits, just down the road from the Vatican, and to receive his orders. His cover was as a photographer so as not to attract undue attention from anyone. Yet it is recorded that he was given full run of the ship by the purser. This is not done for anyone, but it was done for him. Why, if he was only a Jesuit of the lower order or ordinary rank? This doesn't make sense. It is believed the bulk of his 42,000 photographs, including many taken of the Titanic, have never been seen. There is a lot of mystery surrounding Jesuit Francis M. Brown and many questions about his short passage and activities on the Titanic that may never be answered. We may never know exactly what he was doing. But we can infer from the information available what was going on. I do believe for the most part that Eric Phelps has this correct. There is even a story circulating that he was told to get off the boat at Queenstown by his superior when he was offered free passage to New York by a wealthy couple who requested his company. I don't believe this story. I think it's nonsense. It's meant to obfuscate what really happened. Brown was a free agent and had no intention of sailing to New York, as he knew the fate of the ship. He wasn't staying on board. People, the Jesuits are dead men walking, mind-controlled through the repetitive practice of Ignatian spiritual visualization exercises. Automatons of the Jesuit Superior General, acting without mercy or compassion for the extension of the temporal and spiritual power of the Roman papal Caesar. Brown was just another papal lackey following orders. Remember, and I remind you again, according to Jesuit Pietro Alagona, and I quote, "It is lawful to murder the innocent," unquote. And according to Jesuit Luis de Molina, and I quote, "Priests may kill the laity to preserve their goods," unquote. This is the evil mind of the Jesuits. Any evil may be committed for the Pope and the furtherance of the Vatican Roman Catholic Empire. How many men were involved in a plot or knew what was going to happen to the ship? Phelps writes, and I quote, "This leads the author to believe that there were more than 2 Jesuits on board the death ship. There were probably at least 10 of the ship's officers and crew who were professed and under extreme oath, or the 4th oath. There were probably several Knights of Columbus under the oath of the 4th degree, as well as a few Freemasons loyal to the mark IHS, the seal of the Black Pope. This explains why a Jesuit provincial would personally board the vessel. He must have leisurely finalized the plan with his soldiers, charging this select group of the ship's yeomen," unquote. And I tend to agree with this again, because all facts point to this occurring. How was the sinking accomplished? Essentially, Captain Smith ran the ship full speed into a field of icebergs, totally ignoring repeated warnings from other ships, following orders to broadside the ship against an iceberg, breaching 6 compartments, which began to fill with water. The Titanic was designed to withstand a maximum 4-compartment breach. Smith knew this, and so took out 6 to ensure the vessel would sink. Meanwhile, a fire deliberately set, reportedly, was raging deep below deck, which would have compromised the superstructure to some degree with the intense heat. These 2 assaults, external and internal, by fire and flood, caused the boat later to split into 2 under the extreme stress, and finally to sink. There was no accident involved. The sinking was calculated and deliberate, with all warnings to slow down totally ignored. Smith was making his last sea voyage before retiring and was extremely experienced, so this collision with an iceberg was not a mistake. He was suiciding and taking the ship down with him. Please understand this. We've seen this often in recent days, where pilots and captains take the ship or plane down with them. There is no way this was an accident. It was deliberately and intentionally done. Captain Smith and a few others had been called up for martyrdom for the Masonic Brotherhood and the Jesuit Order, and for what they would call the greater glory of God, the extension of the Roman Catholic kingdom. They had nothing to lose, believing they would become heroes and legends of this infamous death ship. Every anomaly in the Titanic's trip, when carefully scrutinized, reveals overwhelming, damning evidence of willful intent to sink the boat and kill most of the passengers. To examine all the facts surrounding the Titanic, which defy the official narrative, and then still claim it was an accident, would just be willful ignorance. In the same way, many will ignore the truth about the Titanic. They will also ignore the truth about Jesus Christ and eternity. The Bible says in Proverbs chapter 14 and verse 12, there is a way that seems right to a man, but its end is the way of death. I hope that you, the listener, is not doing this, not finding your own way. This world is a ship that is sinking, just like the Titanic. Its days are numbered. In John chapter 14 and verse 6, Jesus said, I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. There is only one way forward, folks, into eternity. One way. This life will finish. And then what? God is calling out a holy people unto his name in these last few days. Will you join that mighty heavenly army of soldiers for Jesus Christ? Will you? Think about it. I urge all who are listening to this video and do not know Christ and have not been born again by the Spirit of God to turn to God and be reconciled with him before it's too late. Turn away from evil and stop the rebellion against God and his commands. Change your mind and heart before it's too late. There is only one way to God, and that is through Jesus Christ, his Son. There is no second or third way. By refusing to submit to Jesus Christ, you have chosen to submit to Satan, and like him, will be separated from God and damned eternally. That is the truth. I'm telling you the truth, people. No soul is exempt from spiritual authority. None. Please consider your spiritual state and eternal destiny very carefully before God's judgment falls on this world. I will put links to references in the box below to information spoken about in this video. Thank you for listening, and I pray that God will continue to open your eyes as you search for the truth on all things. Please share this information with others as you're able, so that others might be awakened to the reality of this present world system. I hope to see you in the next video, the second part of the Titanic.